going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica Culverhouse. I'm Program Manager for National Environmental Education Week, which is a program of the National Environmental Education Foundation. I'd like to start by thanking you for joining us for our first webinar and welcome you to this event. Today, the topic of our webinar is Teaching the Water Energy Connection. As I mentioned, EE Week is a program of the National Environmental Education Foundation, and as most of you know, the program is designed to provide educators with resources to support them in integrating environmental topics across the curriculum. EE Week provides lesson plans, information on professional development and funding opportunities, and other educational tools such as online carbon footprint calculators for youth, a nature center map, school of water audits, and other educational activities to bring the environment into the classroom. EE Week 2010 is coming up in less than 2 weeks, April 11 through 17, and the theme for this year's event is Be Water and Energy Wise. So we're using this theme to encourage educators to focus on the connections between water and energy conservation. Of course, energy is required to treat, transport, and heat the water that we use every day. And water is required to produce electricity and other forms of energy that we use. The topic is unique in that there aren't that many resources out there available for a K-12 audience on the water energy connection, which is unique to what EE Week does. Typically, we promote all of the wonderful resources that already exist on a given topic. But this year, we've been fortunate to be able to work with Earth Day Network and River Network to develop a series of tools for educators to help bring this topic into the classroom. We've worked with Earth Day Network to produce a series of lesson plans, which they'll present a little bit later in this event. And we've worked with River Network to develop a student-friendly fact sheet with statistics and information on the connections between water and energy, as well as a web page with links, resources, videos for educators and students, graphics, and other resources. This webinar is part of that package of materials. It's designed to provide you with an introduction to the topic of water and energy connections and some ideas for integrating this topic into your curriculum. We hope that this will be the first in a series of webinars developed by EE Week and our partners, and we welcome your input on how we do tonight and what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. So following the webinar, you'll all be provided with an email link to a survey that you can provide some input and feedback. Tonight's agenda is presented here. First, we'll hear from Bevan Griffiths-Stoughton-Steele from River Network's Saving Water, Saving Energy program, and then from Brenna Holzhauer and Sean Miller from Earth Day Network's Education Department. We're hoping to wrap this up in about an hour or an hour and a half, and that just depends on how many questions we receive during the Q&A portion. We want to have plenty of time for you to ask our presenters your questions. Following each section of the webinar, there will be plenty of time for Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, simply type your question into the chat feature on the right side of your WebEx screen. You'll send that chat to NEAF host, and we'll ask your questions. One of the facilitators will ask your question to the presenter. If we don't address your question during the webinar, if we run out of time, we will try to post Q&A on eeweek.org following the webinar so that we can make sure we address all of your questions. I think I've mentioned you've all been muted so that you cannot speak on the telephone to the presenters or to one another. But if you do have a question or a concern, type it into the chat feature. Following the event, we'll provide the contact information for all of the presenters and facilitators so that you can communicate with us if you have any questions that come up after the live broadcast. But the audio and video portions of the webinar, as well as the PowerPoint presentations, the lesson plans that are presented, and a list of links and resources that are described here will be available at eeweek.org following the webinar. So you may want to take some notes, but if you miss something, there's no need to worry about getting a web link or one of the lesson plans. It'll be available after. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Bevan Griffiths-Stoughton-Steele from River Network, who's going to provide us with the first section of our webinar, which is an overview of the water energy nexus. Bevan, are you ready?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you, Jessica. And thanks to everybody for coming and tuning into this webinar. Hopefully, as you'll see, this is a very important topic and something that's particularly interesting and exciting. And thanks to Jessica for putting together such a great program for this year's EE Week. Let's see. Get started here. All right. So, as Jessica said, I'm going to talk about the Water Energy Nexus. I work for River Network, a national nonprofit organization that works to support grassroots river and watershed organizations across the country. We got interested in the Water Energy Nexus when we started looking at ways to get involved with climate change and realized that there were a number of opportunities to address some of the key issues of global warming through the connections between water and energy. Today I'm going to start out by talking about climate change because, again, the Water Energy Nexus is deeply embedded in the context of climate change. I'll then jump to the water demands for energy production, including impacts and trends and some low water alternatives, and then go to the energy required for water. As Jessica said, to pump, heat, and treat water requires a lot of energy. I'll give a national overview of that and then talk about some ways that saving water can save energy. Now, there's been over 20 years of compelling evidence gathered that shows that humans are influencing our climate in some serious ways. And basically, by emitting CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, it's believed that we're causing a temperature increase that will have a number of negative impacts. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was initiated in 1988, in their most recent report said that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Most of the observed increase in global average temperature since the mid-20th century is very likely due to the observed increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations. So now, while there's a lot of unknowns concerning our climate and the extent of global warming, there are a number of things that we do know and a number of reasons that make addressing climate change really compelling. I have a few bullet points here. First 10 years of the century have been the warmest decade on record. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are currently higher than they have been in at least 800,000 years. As this image to the right shows, sea ice in the Arctic has melted to its third lowest area ever measured. Worldwide, ocean temperatures are rising, and now there's also evidence from other fields of science. Biologists are noticing changes in animal behavior, from breeding patterns to migratory patterns. There's also sea level rise is occurring. Plants are being found at higher elevations than they've ever been found before. So again, there's a lot of evidence saying that humans are in fact warming the climate. Now, our rivers and our water resources already face a number of challenges, from flood control and the big structures that are built to manage our floods, and when people decide to live in floodplains, those cause a number of issues. Water pollution is a big one. Water demand, both agricultural and urban, and invasive species. And now, if these problems weren't enough, the IPCC's latest report says that water and its availability and quality will be the main issues on and main pressures on and issues for societies and the environment under climate change. So many of these challenges that we're already facing with our water resources are going to be exacerbated due to climate change, which means that if we really want to address the climate issue, we really need to start figuring out how we deal with our water issues, both current and in the future. Now, I'm not going to talk too much, or I'm not going to talk any more about climate change. If you want to get some more information, I'd highly recommend checking out the U.S. Global Change Research Program, particularly this report that was released last June called Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States. The report was commissioned by the Bush administration, endorsed by over 13 federal agencies. 8 of the report's 10 key findings specifically mention water, which again shows the importance of water to the climate issue. John Holdren, the director of the White House Office of Technology Policy, has called the report by far the most up-to-date, comprehensive, and authoritative assessment of climate change impacts in the United States. So again, it's a great resource if you want to learn more about climate change and how it will affect your region in the United States. They break down impacts by region. The report has a lot of images, graphs, charts, tables. It's really accessible and a great resource if you want to learn more about climate. Now we'll jump into the water energy nexus. And as Jessica had said, essentially there are two sides to this coin. There's all the water that it takes to provide energy and all the energy that it takes to provide our water. And so I'll start with the water for energy. Now, U.S. primarily gets electricity from thermoelectric power. 90% of all electricity in the U.S. comes from thermoelectric power sources. Thermoelectric power is basically electric power generated from a heat source, such as burning a fuel like coal or natural gas, or from nuclear fission, and then that heat is used typically to produce steam and spin a turbine, which then spins a generator, which produces the electricity that powers all of our homes. And this process requires water, not just for the steam. In fact, sometimes other fluids are used for that, but primarily for the cooling of that steam that needs to be recondensed, or that needs to be condensed back into a liquid so that it can be used to generate steam again. And so massive amounts of water, as I'll show, are used in this process. But there are two main types of cooling systems used by power plants. One is a once-through cooling system, and both types of cooling systems are associated with different categories of water use. The first type that we're going to explore are once-through cooling systems, which result in a vast amount of water withdrawals. Now, water withdrawal is any water that is removed from a ground or diverted from a surface source for use. Now, this water is often returned back to the source that it came from, and then sometimes it's consumed, which I'll get to in a minute. Once-through cooling systems typically take water, say, from a river, put it through the condenser, use it once, and then return that water back to its source that it came from, either a river or a lake or another water body. In the United States, about 49% of all water withdrawals are associated with power plants. That's actually more than agriculture uses overall. And a typical 500-megawatt thermoelectric power plant withdraws over 12 million gallons of water per hour, and some use as much as 20 million gallons per hour, which is equivalent to the volume of 440 to 730 Olympic-sized swimming pools per day. So power plants with using once-through cooling systems withdraw massive amounts of water, and so water is a primary constraint oftentimes for power plant production. If there's not enough water, then the plant can't operate. But it also has impacts on water resources even when there's ample water to go around. Let's see. Now, the next type of cooling system is called a closed-loop or circulating wet system, and this is associated with water consumption. Water consumption is water that's withdrawn, but not directly returned to the source, either because it is evaporated, transpired, incorporated into products or crops, or consumed by people or livestock. And so water consumption, so in the case of a closed-loop system, a whole lot less water is actually withdrawn from the environment, but that water is then put into the system and recirculated and cooled down typically using a cooling tower or a cooling pond. And the process of cooling that recirculated water down ultimately loses a lot of that water is lost through evaporation. You might notice big billowing white clouds coming from massive cooling towers at power plants. That's typically water and not necessarily other forms of pollution. Now, in the U.S., approximately 25% of all non-agricultural freshwater consumption is used for thermal power generation. Now, I said more water is withdrawn for power plants than agriculture, but less is actually consumed because agriculture, typically that water is lost through evapotranspiration. And so the water consumption for power plants is also a major consideration. And though not quite as much as withdrawn, it's still 1 out of every 4 gallons of water consumed in the United States outside of agriculture. And on average, about 2 gallons of water is consumed for every kilowatt hour of electricity produced in the United States. Now, other than just water withdrawals and water consumption, there are a number of other impacts of thermoelectric power generation on our water resources. Power plants are the largest producers of toxic waste, surpassing plastic, paint, and chemical manufacturing. They produce heavy metals. Also, lake and stream bed acidification occurs as a result of the sulfur and nitrogen oxides released through burning of fuels such as coal. Toxic solid waste, such as coal ash or slurry, and nuclear waste can also pose threats to our water resources if they end up being improperly stored. Or, last year there was a giant coal ash spill in Tennessee that caused a number of issues for the river that was nearby. They also result in thermal pollution, and this is typically an issue for once-through cooling plants because so much water is taken out, it's put through the system, oftentimes the heat that in the process of cooling the power plant, the heat is absorbed into the water, and then that warmer water is returned back to its source. That can have a number of negative impacts on fish and the aquatic species living in the water source that water is returned to. It can reduce dissolved oxygen levels and cause other issues. And now so much water is taken out, up to 12 million gallons an hour, that wildlife, microorganisms, eggs can get caught in the intake structures, which also is, an environmental harm from power production. And finally, there are greenhouse gas emissions that result from extracting, refining, transporting, and burning the fuels that are used. And, of course, these greenhouse gas emissions all feed into climate change, which then further impacts our water resources and sort of creates this vicious loop of negative impacts on our water supply. Now, other major source of electricity in the United States is hydropower. Now, everybody is aware that big dams can cause some harm to our rivers and our water supplies by blocking the flow of sediment downstream or just generally disrupting the natural flow of a river. But what most people don't realize is that hydroelectricity also results in a large amount of water consumption. And this is from the water being backed up in reservoirs, having a big surface area and being more or less stagnant. And so evaporation, especially on hot days, can occur. And it's been estimated that about almost 4 billion gallons of water per day is evaporated off the surface of our hydroelectric reservoirs. On average, it takes about 18 gallons of water to produce 1 kilowatt-hour of electricity from a hydropower. Now, this varies based on the surface area of the reservoir and the depth of the storage reservoir, which all influence how much water it actually takes to produce a kilowatt-hour of electricity. But regardless, it's very significant, and inevitably, when you're producing hydroelectric power, water will be evaporated off the surface. And as an example, the Hoover Dam, about an average of 1 billion gallons of water, or enough to provide the water needs for 3.8 million homes, is evaporated off the surface of the water behind the Hoover Dam each day. Now, there are a number of interesting trends that we're seeing with water for electricity. Overall, thanks to the efforts of environmental organizations and concerned consumers, water demand overall has been pretty steady in the last 15 years. But water demand for the energy sector has grown faster than any other sector and will continue to do so for a number of reasons. One is, as we try to address climate change and shift to low-carbon technologies, many of these technologies actually require more water. Capturing the carbon from, say, a coal-fired power plant and pumping it back into the ground for storage so that it stays out of our atmosphere uses about 30% more water than a typical coal-fired power plant would, which already, as we've seen, uses a whole lot of water. Concentrating solar thermal power, which differs from photovoltaic solar. Concentrating solar thermal are the systems, the big arrays of mirrors that reflect the sun's light to typically it's actually a form of thermoelectric power generation, just using the sun instead of a different fuel source. Actually, it's been found to consume 2 times as much water compared to coal. And by 2030, it's been estimated that electricity demands in the country will increase by about 50%. And if this occurs, and if current trends continue, the consumption of water for electricity production could more than double. And part of that is because as we shift to more of a circulating wet systems, they consume more water. They ultimately withdraw a little less, but consumption will ultimately go up. And as we go to low carbon, if we choose low carbon technologies that also require more water, the corresponding water demands for electricity production will go up. And by 2030, again, following these trends, water consumption for electricity production could equal all of the non-agricultural water consumption from 1995 in the United States. Now, it's not just electricity production that requires a lot of water. Our other energy, transportation is responsible for about 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And so there's been a big push to switch to domestic sources of fueling, sources of energy for our transportation needs. But if we do that, then there's going to be some pretty major water implications. It's been said that switching from foreign sources of oil to domestic sources of energy is really just trading foreign oil for domestic water. As this chart shows, biofuels consume between 2 and 200 times more water than gasoline. This big variance between the 2 and 200 is due to the fuel type, the source of crops for the biofuels and the irrigation needs of those fuels. And even switching to electric-powered vehicles can result in between 2 and 5 times more water consumption and up 5 and 20 times more water withdrawals due to, again, the water required to produce electricity that would then end up being fed to power our vehicles. But luckily, there are a number of low water using technologies out there, and lucky for the climate, 2 of those are very clean, carbon neutral, carbon free electricity supplies, the 2 best being wind and photovoltaic solar. Now if you look at this chart of gallons consumed per kilowatt hour, you'll see that wind and photovoltaic solar require or consume magnitudes less water than all the other sources of electricity that we typically rely on. So again, promoting wind and photovoltaic solar panels will ultimately result in a number of in reduced water consumption, and they also have the benefit of, at least during operation, avoiding those other negative impacts caused by power production. Now, as an example, I'm going to show you this map from a study that was conducted by the U.S. Department of Energy, which looked at what would happen if 20% of the U.S. Electricity production came from wind power by the year 2030. Now, as you can see in this map, a number of states have enough wind potential, again, and due to the drastically less water needs of wind power, a number of states have the potential to save a lot of water by developing wind resources that don't require water to operate. And again, lucky for us, many of the states with the most wind potential happen to be states that are already in the west and southwest that are already facing water constraints. In total, if we were to produce 20% wind by 2030, water consumption would be reduced by a cumulative 4 trillion gallons through 2030, which represents a reduction of electric power water consumption by 17%. Now I'm going to talk about the energy that it takes to provide water. Overall, in the U.S., about 75 billion kilowatt hours per year are required to pump and treat water. Now, when you think about it, most of this energy is actually used for pumping water. A gallon of water weighs over 8 pounds, and so and most of us get water from remote sources. And so, in order to make it so that every time you turn on your tap, that water flows, the distribution system needs to be pressurized by pumps, and that water needs to be brought from the source nearby your home. And even if you were to get water, say, from your backyard from a groundwater well, it takes energy to pump that water from the ground back up to your house. The 75 billion kilowatt hours per year results in is equal to about 3 to 4% of total U.S. electricity consumption. Now, this is comparable to the combined electricity consumption of all the microwaves, color TVs, and computers found inside our homes. So, again, it takes vast amounts of energy to provide water. And while it takes a lot of energy to provide water, we use it incredibly inefficiently. And this we also manage it inefficiently. The USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, estimates that water losses in U.S. water systems are about 6 billion gallons per day, which represents more than enough water to supply the 10 largest cities in the U.S. Now, older cities, especially on the East Coast that have aging pipes and infrastructure, some of them lose 30% of their water, 30 to 40% of their water each day. Now, this is often water that's already been treated and already been pumped, and so it already contains a lot of embedded energy. And based on national averages, about 1.5 billion kilowatt hours electricity is wasted just from the 6 billion gallons of water lost each day, which is enough electricity to supply 130 homes, and it represents over 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. But again, that 75 billion kilowatt hours only represents the water required to pump and treat. It doesn't include the water required that's embedded at end uses. The main one being heating water, but also cooling water, or pressurizing it, or purifying it, even more than when it comes out of the tap. There are a number of ways that water is embedded at end use, and so River Network looked at the water-related energy use in the United States, and could only find data on water heating. But by just including residential and commercial water heating, we found that water-related energy use in the U.S. is equivalent to at least 520 billion kilowatt hours per year, which is equal to the electricity output of 150 thermoelectric or coal-fired power plants. The greenhouse gas emissions, which are again driving climate change, that result from our water use are about 290 million metric tons, which is equal to the annual greenhouse gas emissions of over 50 million automobiles. Now, to put this in perspective and to think about just how much energy it takes, especially when you're heating water, consider that after space heating and cooling, water heating is typically the largest energy user inside the home. Heating 2 gallons of water consumes more energy than lighting an entire home for an hour. Again, assuming you're using compact fluorescent light bulbs, it's 400 watts versus 250 watts. And in 5 minutes, a hot water faucet uses as much energy as a 60-watt light bulb uses in 14 hours. So we're talking about a lot of energy and a lot of potential to save energy through water conservation or efficiency. Now, a perfect example of a cost-effective way to save water and energy is through our shower heads, because, again, they primarily use hot water, which has that added energy embedded in it. Now, a family of 4, switching from a standard 2.5 gallon per minute shower head to an efficient 1.5 gallon per minute shower head can save over 8,300 gallons of water, over 1,200 kilowatt hours of electricity, which is more than the annual electricity consumption of a clothes washer. Now, again, a clothes washer is also a device that, a more efficient model would end up saving both water and energy. And they also will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 1,600 pounds. And what's important to most families is that, an investment of up to $25 for a shower head, or in my case, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I got a shower head for free for my water utility. You can save up to $175 off utility bills just by, using less water in the shower. But you can also save energy through saving cold water, as toilets show. The U.S. EPA has a WaterSense program, which is similar to the Energy Star program, but it's labeled on toilets and water-using fixtures. And they found that if just 1% of American homes replace an older toilet with a WaterSense labeled toilet, it would save more than 38 million kilowatt hours of electricity annually. This electricity represents enough to supply more than 43,000 households for a month. And again, it's saving only cold water, not warm water. There's also a lot of potential to save water outdoors. The EPA has said that of the 7 billion gallons of water used outdoors on the average day, as much as 50% is wasted due to wind, evaporation, improper system design, installation, or maintenance. Now, there are a variety of ways to use water more efficiently outdoors. There's irrigation controls, there's different landscapes, but regardless of those strategies, the 7 billion gallons of water that is used outdoors accounts for about 3.8 billion kilowatt hours of electricity use each year. That results in about 2.7 million metric tons of CO2 emissions, which is equal to the emissions of over 500,000 cars. And it's important to keep in mind that outdoor water use is often what drives the need for new water supplies, and those new water supplies are often more energy intensive than existing water supplies. Using Portland, Oregon as an example again, typically Portland receives water from a surface water source that requires hardly any energy at all to provide. But in the summertime, when people are using their water outdoors, and when that water supply gets low, we have to rely on a groundwater source that gets pumped over 450 feet up. And now that groundwater source is 6.5 times more energy intensive than the source we use throughout the year. So saving water outdoors can also reduce the need to use to rely on the most energy-intensive water sources in your community. Now, another strategy for saving energy by saving water is green infrastructure and low-impact development. Now, these are pretty broad terms that include a variety of approaches, such as green roofs, permeable pavement, bioretention areas, and the list goes on. But basically, the concept of low-impact development or green infrastructure is to return developed areas back to their pre-development natural hydrology. So to basically let the water soak back into the ground where it falls. Now, doing this allows aquifers to get recharged, which, as many communities, especially in the West, are finding, unsustainable water use is bringing aquifer levels down. And as they pave over their surfaces, when the rain does fall, it doesn't go back to recharging those aquifers. It runs off the surfaces and goes to the nearest water body and flows out of the watershed. And so allowing aquifers to recharge can maintain aquifer levels or groundwater levels, which would reduce pumping costs. It also create a water supply if a city is looking at importing their water or desalinating seawater as their next available source. This can recharge groundwater aquifers and provide that kind of supply. And promoting rainwater harvesting, as this picture shows, either through rain barrels or cisterns, also provides another low-energy water supply that can offset more energy-intensive water demands. Now, throughout this presentation, I've kind of thrown a lot of numbers and concepts and facts and figures at you, but overall, if there's one thing you take away, I hope that it's that water equals energy and energy equals water. It takes a lot of energy to pump, heat, and treat our water, so saving water can save energy. And on the flip side, it takes a lot of water to produce our electricity, and so saving energy, turning off that light bulb, can ultimately save water. And so understanding this hopefully will reinforce the need to conserve both and solve a number of issues. Thanks a lot. Now, are there any questions?
If anyone has any questions, you can type them into the chat feature, address them under send to host, and Sarah Kozicki, our program associate, is going to facilitate the Q&A. Sarah, have any questions come in?
Yes, Bevan, we have a question from Eileen. She'd like to know, how do we know that the evaporation associated with hydropower is coming from the reservoir and not the entire length of the river, and why is this significant?
So that's a good question. The study that these numbers came from is from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and basically they developed an equation that compared the evaporation rates of a free-flowing river to those of a reservoir contained behind a dam. So the evaporation numbers are pretty reliable, but that question does raise an interesting point, which is that many dams are built for purposes other than hydroelectric generation, and so you can't necessarily say that every gallon of water evaporated behind the dam, is a result of electricity production, since those dams are often used for flood control or as water supplies. So it does get a little bit complicated, but the general point that hydroelectric power does result in some water consumption, I do think still rings true, but you're right, it is more complicated than that direct correlation, and so I'm glad that question was brought up.
Great. We also had a question on one of your first slides. You explained how water is used in thermoelectric power generation. And I was just wondering if you could go a little more in-depth about exactly the process in which the water is used to create electricity.
Well, yeah, it's primarily just used for the cooling. And again, there were those two main types, but basically so much heat is generated through the thermoelectric process that the system itself can get too hot and become a lot less efficient. So you need to extract that heat out of the thermoelectric power plant in some way. And so water has been found to be the cheapest and in many ways most efficient way to actually get that water out of the system as quickly as possible. And so basically the steam that is produced through the process that spins the turbine is then put in the contact into a condenser where water flows through, and that water absorbs the heat from the steam. The steam condenses back to a liquid, and then, like I said, either whether it's a once-through system or a recirculating wet system, that water that absorbs the heat either goes back out to the source that it came from, where it's at a higher temperature, and that heat energy is put back into the river or lake or what have you, or it goes into a cooling tower where the water basically is put at the top of the cooling tower and then trickles down where it comes in contact with air, and that water ultimately evaporates, or that energy, the air then takes the energy from the water and evaporates it out the cooling tower. I hope that didn't confuse things more and maybe clarified a little bit.
No, that was a good explanation. Water is obviously a very integral part of thermoelectric power generation.
Yeah. Now that said, real quick, there are a couple. There are alternatives to water-cooled systems, but they often are less efficient and more expensive. There are dry-cooled systems, which instead of using water, they actually just use air to cool the power plants, but the biggest issue with those is that power plants typically are operating at their full capacity in the summertime when everybody turns on their air conditioning and when electricity demand is the highest. And, of course, that also is when the air temperature is typically the highest. And so you lose, it becomes less efficient to use air to cool power plants. And so, again, that's why water has historically been the water-cooled systems are far more prevalent, but there are a couple power plants that have been built using air-cooled systems, and hopefully we'll see a bigger push for those in the future.
Okay, great, thank you. And we'll probably do one more question. You mentioned that, there's a lot of talk, nowadays about using biofuels as an alternative source of fuel, and you mentioned that some people may not realize that biofuels actually consume more water than traditional sources. Can you go into a little bit about why exactly biofuels consume so much more water than gasoline?
Yeah, well, it's primarily for irrigation. It takes a whole lot of water to grow crops, and as I had kind of briefly noted in the presentation, agriculture is the largest water consumer in the United States, even though power production is the largest sector withdrawing water in the United States. And so most of the water is primarily for irrigation. Now there are some biofuel crops that are being developed that don't necessarily require irrigation to grow, and so those will again potentially reduce the water demands of biofuel production. But then there's also the process of refining, the starches from the biofuel itself into a usable fuel also requires quite a bit of water. Now, I'm not really versed in the details of the biofuel refinement process, and I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but a significant amount of water is also required in the actual refining of the biofuels themselves.
Okay. Great, thank you. It looks like we just got a question in from Melinda, who'd like to know if you could comment on the need for energy storage associated with photovoltaic and wind energy, and if you have any comments regarding the variability of renewable sources.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the biggest issues with renewable sources, and there are a number of strategies on the table. It's kind of too early to say what is going to be the most feasible. In fact, I've even heard calls to use water to store the energy that is produced when it's not needed from the intermittent renewable sources. The idea being that when the power is being produced and if it's not needed, you pump water up a hill, and then when it is needed, you let that water go back down and produce hydroelectricity. Again, I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. It's something that's been proposed. Another idea, one that's been promoted by Al Gore, has been the use of plug-in electric hybrid vehicles, where you plug them into the electric grid, and assuming a smart grid system is in place, when excess electricity is being produced and not needed, it can actually be stored into our automobiles, more or less. Because if you think about it, the more people that are using a plug-in electric vehicle, each vehicle is like a mini power storage plant, and so you can have a distributed storage system like that. There's also been talk of using compressed air to store the excess electricity, basically pumping air into the caverns in the ground, creating high pressure, and then releasing it back out, spinning a turbine when that power is needed. And so it's certainly a hurdle to renewables. Hopefully it's one that will be addressed as we come up with better technologies and as we put in place a smart grid system. Again, I think that will also solve a number of those issues, because there's almost always power needed somewhere at any time of the day. And so, if we have a system in place where we know where to send that power, where it's actually needed, I think some of those storage issues will be addressed. But you're right, that is still something that hopefully we'll be figuring out soon.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have another question from Eileen. Is there any concern that water sense statistics are being inflated, and do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, to be honest, my work with the water sense program has been very positive. I don't believe that the statistics are being conflated. My guess is perhaps that some of that came from that question might have been posed from the recent discovery that Energy Star was certifying appliances that were essentially hoaxes. Someone put the Government Accountability Office, I believe, submitted some false applications for Energy Star approval, and they got approved, and so it sort of kind of destroyed some of the credibility of Energy Star. But with WaterSense, they actually use a different certification process. All of the products are third-party certified, and they've actually developed new metrics for testing the efficiency and performance rating of WaterSense labeled devices. And so it's been a fairly thorough process, and I've been privy to some presentations from some of the people that have been developing those metrics, and they're very thorough. And in terms of the actual water savings from the devices, I don't think that those numbers are inflated. So I have quite a bit of faith in the system, but it's a good question.
Okay, good to know. We have a question from Gail, who would like to know how biodigesters fit into this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Well, biodigesters, particularly as it relates to wastewater treatment facilities, they can be huge. And I didn't have time to get into this during my presentation, but there's a whole concept called integrated resource recovery that is being heavily promoted in British Columbia, and it's being implemented maybe under different labels throughout the country and throughout the United States. But the basic idea is viewing waste as a resource, and especially water waste, recycling water so that you can use it again. And part of that is actually harnessing through biogas digesters, for instance, all of the energy that is essentially embedded within our solid, the waste that we put through a wastewater treatment facility. Now, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I've read of wastewater treatment facilities that are able to use biogas digesters to produce electricity from the methane and what have you that comes from our human waste, and offset up to 40% of their electricity demand. So there's definitely some potential for that. I think that is definitely a positive renewable energy or carbon neutral power source. Again, I think that it's still in pretty early stages of development, but there are a number of places that are starting to install those technologies with great success. Another idea that I think is happening in the San Francisco Bay area, the water utility or the wastewater utility there has actually been going around and collecting food scraps to feed into their wastewater treatment plants, which then provides more fuel for their biogas digesters, which produce electricity. And so again, that's another renewable energy source that will hopefully play a bigger role in the future.
Great, thanks. And let's see, we have our last question for you from Gary, who'd like to know if it is more efficient to get water from a surface source than from groundwater.
Yeah, that's a good question. It all depends, but typically surface water sources require about 30% less energy than a groundwater source. Now that's because, again, groundwater has to be drawn from where it's at. And so the energy that it takes for a groundwater source is really contingent on the depth of the aquifer, or how far down that groundwater actually is. So the deeper the groundwater, the more energy it takes to pump it up to where you need it. Now the caveat to that is that, if the surface water source is a couple hundred miles away and it needs to be pumped over, some hills or over a mountain range, such as in California, for instance, Southern California, they get a lot of their water from the State Water Project, which is technically a surface water source coming up from, I believe, the Hetch Hetchy, but it's pumped 4,000 feet over the Tehachapi Mountains, which makes it one of the most energy-intensive water sources in the world. So, that said, it's a little bit complicated, but in general, if you're talking about two local water supplies, a surface water source is generally going to be less energy-intensive. Another thing to kind of confuse or complicate matters a little more is groundwater supplies can require less treatment, if it's a protected groundwater source. So, if you're getting surface water, say, from the Mississippi, where there are a number of upstream users putting contaminants in, it can require a lot of energy to treat contaminated surface water. And so, again, that complicates things a little bit, but in general, surface water sources are less energy intensive than groundwater.
Evan, thanks so much for the presentation and the Q&A. This has been very helpful and informative. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for listening and for asking some great questions.
We're going to pass the presentation now to our friends from Earth Day Network, Brenna Holzhauer and Sean Miller, who are going to talk about a couple of case studies and present some lesson plan ideas for integrating these concepts into your curriculum. Brenna, are you ready?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brenna Holzhauer. I work in the education department at Earth Day Network. We're a national nonprofit located in Washington, D.C., focused on promoting Earth Day every year, along with year-round environmental education and green schools programs. We just had a great overview from Bevan on consumption of energy and water, and now we're going to talk about how this translates to schools. Most school facilities are huge consumers of water and electricity, and they have giant ecological footprints. So any conservation measures you can take in your classroom and in your school will really make a big difference. And you'll also be providing real-world examples for your students, using your projects as hands-on teaching tools. So our first success story is Power Down Fridays from Henderson High School in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And this concept started when the district report showed that more energy was used at Henderson than any other facility in the district. And the Student Environmental Club wanted to correlate with the district's new energy management policy and reduce the school's emissions. Henderson is the oldest school in the district, and it uses the most energy. So the students and teachers there were really interested in making a difference. So they started by asking the faculty to turn off lights, computers, and monitors when they were not in use. And it started out being successful, but they wanted to do something more. So they came up with the idea of Power Down Fridays by asking teachers and students to avoid turning on lights or electronics all day on Fridays that were designated as Power Down days. This all started because the principal had seen success from student-run initiatives in the past and wanted to try taking a grassroots initiative to address the energy problem in the district. So he approached the Environmental Club for ideas and assistance, and the students and teachers involved in this club were already knowledgeable on, based on their prior partnerships, activities, and campaigns. They're involved with Earth Day Network's Climate Change Educator Grant Program, as well as some other activities they've done. So they were sort of experts in the topic, and they wanted to share their knowledge with other students and teachers at the school. So they worked together to create and promote Power Down Fridays. The students in the art classes and in the club made commercials for the school news broadcast. They hung posters around school. They silk screened T-shirts and installed power-down light switch plates as reminders to turn out lights. They also gave handmade bookmarks made from recycled materials as rewards to students and teachers who participated in their program. The program ended up being really successful. They showed great results. The data that the students collected showed that Henderson reduced its carbon footprint by more than 20% in the first month, and the success has continued since. The Environmental Club students are now helping other high schools in the area to promote Power Down Friday, and this can really make a difference. The total electricity expenses incurred by the district in 2008 when they did the report was nearly $3 million, and if all the schools in the district could reduce their energy use by just 10%, that would save over $300,000 in the district, which would cover salary and benefits of about 6 entry-level teachers. So it's a great success, and they've received recognition from an alum of Henderson who was a senior advisor for Representative Markey. He put Henderson's Power Down campaign into one of the speeches as an example of a green school. And so they're still working to promote this program and spread it throughout the district. It's been a great success. We also have some resources listed here for you, and you don't have to worry about writing these down. I believe the webinar facilitators will provide a list at the end. But you can view Henderson's initiatives with Earth Day Network on our website. You can also see articles about the success of their program on their district website. We also created a student toolkit. We have an article written by a Henderson student geared towards other students with step-by-step instructions on how to do this. This is on our partner's website on aspace.org. And then you can also learn more about our grant program that we work with Henderson through on our website as well. And we also have a Green Your School guide on our website with information, lesson plans, and student action plans on energy efficiency and daylighting. We also have another success story on conserving water, and this relates to rainwater collection at Woodridge Elementary in San Antonio, Texas. And for 5 years, several teachers instituted raised garden beds and have integrated them into the curriculum, mostly in second, third, and third grade, but other classes use it as well. And they also have an after-school gardening club, which is geared towards their bilingual students. The students plant and harvest and prepare and eat from the gardens, and a lot of them are urban students, and this is one of their only hands-on exposures to nature. So the garden program was a really big success. However, recent droughts in South Texas have resulted in stringent water rationing guidelines, which caused the gardening program to become costly and irregular. So the teachers began to brainstorm how to continue garden projects while practicing water conservation habits. These teachers also applied for a grant with Earth Day Network. They came up with the idea to purchase and install a 1,000-gallon rainwater collection system, and we gave them some seed money to move forward with this project. They also have grants pending from the city's water provider, and they have also done some research on their own. One of the teachers became certified as a junior master gardener so she could learn rainwater collection and garden management techniques. And they partnered with their county Master Gardeners Association to identify the location and the best techniques for rainwater collection. This program is still in process, but it will be the first rainwater collection tank installed in the district, and it will increase watering capacity and will allow them to continue their garden program as well as develop it into future land butterfly and hummingbird habitat. And the students will be involved in the plan. They'll design, conduct research, and plant appropriate plants based on native and migratory butterfly and hummingbird species. And they will continue to partner with their Master Gardeners Association to move forward with techniques and support for the garden. We also have resources relevant to this success story. On our Green Your School guide, we have a background document on water conservation at schools. We also have a lesson plan on rain gardens. And we have other resources on gardening in general and outdoor classrooms. And now I'm going to pass the presentation to my colleague, Sean Miller, who will talk about some other success stories.
So this is Sean Miller, and I'm an education director here at Earth Day Network. And most of you might already know our third example, which is T.C. Williams High School in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., because it was depicted in a movie in 2000 called Remember the Titans. And this movie was about actually the football team at the school, and it discusses it was one of the early integrated football teams, and it caused a lot of, popularity with the school that has continued to this day. And the school is often referred to as TC, so you'll hear me refer to it as TC throughout the rest of the presentation. But even if you do know this school through the movie, you might not know that it's also basically the most green or most efficient school in the state of Virginia. And it received this award recently by the U.S. Green Building Council 2 years ago, that it's the first LEED Gold certified school across the K-12 curriculum. And that's really an accomplishment that is a testament to its water savings. And what they've done is, and you're going to hear me present about, is they've built a very large cistern, as Devin mentioned earlier, as an efficiency measure in his presentation. And this cistern has enabled them to receive, as a whole, on top of their other measures, the gold rating. And right here, you can see where the cistern lives in the photo on the left. And if you look at the green grass, it actually sits down inside there. And they really have done a phenomenal job here with the construction. It was a renovation project. And the cistern lives underneath the front of the school. So it's really a testament to how seamless these kind of renovations can be. It's a 450,000-gallon cistern, and it's also able to save the school 5 million gallons of potable water a year. And what happens is it basically, it rains, it falls on the roof, and it's filtered through the school building itself, and that's what the photo on the right is a testament to. And that can provide these kind of efficiency measures because they're able to store the water and reuse it throughout the building. These kind of efficiency measures can equal, for this school, TC, about 30 to 40 grand a year, which is not only the best environmental favor, but also the most economic advantage as well. That alone right there, that 30 to 40 grand that they're saving a year, has been able to cover the upfront costs that were about 2% more for making TC a LEED certified school. So the district was able to front the money, and then because they knew they were able to save money in the future on just the water savings alone. It's not counting other things like solar that exist at the school now. So here you can see some of the ways that the water system works at TC in practice. The first thing is that they have a green roof, and it's located in several parts. It's not just one flat section that you might normally see in other green roof pictures or depictions. And it's portioned out, so they collect water in more than one spot. You can actually see me in the picture when the school opened at the beginning of the 2007-2008 school year. We were invited to take a tour, and you can see me checking out the roof, and it's not so green, I apologize, but it was a dark October day. But what more or less happens is the roof is able to collect and filter the water through the building. And when it goes into the system, it's able to then go into places like the toilets, irrigation, as well as cooling the building via the air conditioning system. And this is, again, something that's a viable way to save money and energy and water. It's also to note that they use city water for drinking, and that's an important concept because we don't live in places like this here outside of D.C. We still get a lot of acidic-based rain because of various forms of pollution moving across the country with the west to east flow of weather. So with that, they still rely on city water drinking, but none of this, and I want to stress this, none of this would have happened without community support. And this was a bottom-up process, and this school is a phenomenally green school, but none of it would have happened without, in 2002, many of the parents and community volunteers and even students knew that their school was going to be renovated, that it was coming up in the district plan. And they got together and had meetings with the district officials saying that they wanted to be the first school in the state of Virginia to do this. And over 5 years, they were able to make that plan happen. And the school, like I said, reopened in 2007-2008 school year and is now a shining success that I encourage anyone to go and see. Here you can get a better idea of where the cistern rests during the construction, where the front of the school is the last piece of the building that's extending out there on the left side of the picture, left center, and the cistern sits right dead center. And then on the right, you can see how close this actually is to the road and thus the bay, where here in the Washington, D.C. area, Alexandria in particular, we're all very concerned about pollution levels with the Chesapeake Bay and helping to clean the bay. And so this is one of the best ways to help promote clean water and water efficiency in a locality such as Washington, D.C., where the watershed is so important. I've provided here a digitally animation that T.C. Williams and the Alexandria School District has created for you, where you can bring this up in your classrooms and actually run an animation on how the cistern works. And it shows you step by step in the digital animation of how the water flows from the roof all the way to the bottom of the cistern and is saved and used. And then we've also have filmed a tour of the entire school at our earthdaytv.net resource, where you can walk through the school. It's about a 20-minute shot, and show that in your classroom as well to show some of these benefits in practice. So while that may have been more of a large-scale success, I wanted to talk about our last success story, which is more of a bottom-up one, and that's Bloom High School, and they're located right outside of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. And this is probably one of our favorite schools that we work with because it is the quintessential American school. It's this 1930s beautiful giant building that was decorated via the Art Deco style. And actually the Civilian Conservation Corps helped construct it back in the 30s as a Depression-era project. But it's not just the building that brings us to this school and why we have worked with this school. It's because they have awesome teachers. And they're presented here, two of them. And on the left is Jill Krasinski. She's the AP Bio teacher. And Barry Latham is on the right, and he's the AP Chem teacher. And with their support and over the years of us working with them, they've had phenomenal success with Bloom and turning them into a green school. And that's something that we've done in one way through solar panel installations, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, whereas TC had a water-based solution, I wanted to highlight the energy-based solution here with Bloom. And we did a PV system, which is short for photovoltaic. And that's just a fancy way of saying you're getting your energy directly from the sun. And that is depicted on the right here, where the sun's energy goes directly either into your home or whatever, your office building, and then can either power that building or go back in the grid if you have that extra electricity available. So that's the typical way that it's used and was discussed a little bit earlier, as was thermal. And solar thermal is the other type of popular form of solar electricity. The difference is thermal is heating up water. And you're seeing this popular in places like Hawaii right now, where it's mandatory all new home construction has to have solar thermal because it's such an efficient measure that can be used from the sun's light. Those are the two basic schematics on what solar power is. It's the best form of renewable energy in the long run, and I wanted to point that out here because sometimes that's overlooked. Every 7 minutes, there's enough of the sun's energy hitting this planet that it equals the total global energy output per year that all of our society combined. So all the energy that our society uses every year, that equals 7 minutes of sunlight hitting the planet. So it's really a question of efficiency. And when we're talking about that, it's great to tout the environmental benefits when you're working with schools and school districts. But oftentimes, and most of us are familiar with this, you have to cut a lot of red tape. And with that, these kind of successes have a lot of economic benefits. And that's how we were able to convince the school district that houses Bloom that they were going to save, as you can see on the bottom there, $500,000 over the warranty lifespan of the system, as well as all these other environmental benefits. And you can see the photovoltaic array in its completion here on the bottom right. It's going to power about 15 to 20 classrooms on average, and it's going to reduce, as you can see, almost 40,000 pounds of carbon a year, which is just phenomenal. We got the students out there actually to help construct it and promote the green jobs aspect and green economy work that can be done with solar panel installations, as well as the educational value there. We provided a action plan for how you can get solar at your school via the first link provided, and that's part of our Green Your School website that Brenna mentioned earlier. Second, you can actually check out Bloom's PV system, and that's the Fat Spaniel hyperlink that you can see there, where it gives a minute-by-minute update on the system's performance. And you can look at that in terms of energy savings, carbon savings, and money savings. Then lastly, this isn't the only thing that Bloom does. They're pretty much a green school, as I was saying, and they're one of the best schools in the state of Illinois in terms of biodiesel, and I really encourage people to check that out. With that, that's me and Brenna there celebrating on the top of the roof at Bloom, and we're available to answer your questions at the information on the PowerPoint here, or right now via the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Sean and Brenna. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to facilitate the Q&A, and if anyone has any additional questions that you haven't typed into the chat yet, please do so. Okay, go ahead, Sarah. Was everyone able to hear Sarah's question?
No.
Okay, sorry, just one second.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, sorry about that. Brenna, I have the first question is for you. It's from Karen, who'd like to know how many Fridays per month were Power Down Fridays at Henderson? I actually don't know the exact number. I know they started with a couple to test out the success, and then they were determining it from there. I can find out and get back to you if there's a way to post answers to questions after the webinar.
Absolutely.
We both of us worked with the school, and I'm sorry, I'm going to chime in. This is Sean. They started it as once a month, and then it became weekly because it was so successful. So they did kind of a test run, and then it became something that was really just popular and basically mandated because so many people thought it was a success.
Great. Sean, my next question is for you. Can you explain a little bit more about what it means to be LEED certified?
Sure. LEED certification is something that the U.S. Green Building Council awards to either new construction or renovated construction projects for really any type of building now. It can be for hospitals, it can be for school buildings, it can be for just regular old apartment buildings or homes even. And it's a way of assessing the green variables of a construction project that range from energy and water to even indoor air quality. And it's meant to be kind of a way or a blueprint for one to achieve sustainability with their construction projects, because buildings on average contribute close to 40% in one way or another the carbon emissions in the U.S. So greening the building industry is one of the best ways to fight climate change. And so the USGBC functions with both state and local chapters and architects across really the world. Actually, there's a World Building Council to help people through this process whenever they have a renovation or a new construction with one of their buildings. So they have one specific to schools, and it's the LEED for Schools rating system. And it measures, again, things like energy and water, and it's a point system. And if you get enough points, you can become a green school, and there's 4 different levels. And there's basic certification, then bronze, then silver, gold, and then sometimes you can get a platinum, so you can get that extra cream of the crop certification. But that's very hard to do, and only a few buildings in the country are platinum.
Great, thanks. My next question is from Jimmy, and I think it's open to both of you. What were some of the biggest hurdles as far as getting past or kind of proposing projects to administration for, any and all of the schools that you've discussed?
Well, I'll go first. Again, this is Sean. It's almost always economics. They want to know what the dollar savings are going to be and how much it's going to potentially cost them. And so when we usually make these presentations, I almost always talk about the economic values first before getting into the environmental or community or educational benefits. So with the Bloom example, for instance, I actually went and met with the assistant superintendent of the school district. And it was that one-on-one meeting that was able to really sell the overall project, where we did a lot of things at Bloom in addition to the solar panel installation, such as like a greenhouse construction and native plantings. So I really encourage that kind of personal one-on-one communication where you know your facts and you know what they're looking for, which is usually the economic performance. But at the same time, green schools and green projects at schools have educational benefits, and I would encourage everyone to check out, for instance, the Great Cat study from 2006. It's called Greening America's Schools, Costs and Benefits, and that really lays out the reasoning in terms of educational benefits of green schools. It can raise test scores, it can eliminate sick days, it promotes teacher and student increases in attendance, and all those can equal monetary savings that on average are about $100 grand a year if you're a LEED certified green school, and that's roughly 2 teachers' salaries.
And I would also like to point out that we gave a range of project examples, and some of them go all the way up to school renovation, which obviously involves the administration, and some of them were just based on some classes getting together and student clubs. And so every school is different, every district is different, and every administration has more or less buy-in to what projects you're proposing. And if you are not getting a good response from your administration, you can still move forward by getting student and teacher support, getting parent support and community support, and eventually that will work its way up into the senior levels.
And we've, again, real quick, we've tried to break down the answer to this question per greening area on our Green Your School guide, and that's earthday.org/greenyourschool.
Great. I have another question from Karen regarding Henderson High School. Were there any concerns about the ramifications of Power Down Friday with regard to teachers not being able to use technology like computers for teaching? There were some concerns, but as far as I know, it's been a really big hit. A lot of students have commented that they really love having the classroom lights turned out. They look forward to Fridays because the daylight is so much more relaxing and makes such a positive learning experience. And I think that everyone has kind of just grown to accept the power down days and look forward to them even. So if there was any apprehension at first, that's why they started out with just one day a month and giving rewards for people who participated, and then it eventually just turned into a school-wide program every week. Great. And I'll just pose one last question here. We've talked about how teachers and administrators are involved in these school greening efforts. Were any of the custodial staff involved at all during any of these projects? And, do you have any ideas or comments about how that might work? Well, again, there's always a range depending on the school and the project, and every custodial staff is different. Some are not interested in helping out at all, and some are definitely jump on board right away. The best way to approach custodial staff, in our opinion, is to have a well-developed plan and also stress the ways that you'll be saving them time and work. So any way you can sort of tailor your program to meet the needs of your custodial staff, and definitely working together, having a team of students to help them out with any extra tasks that are involved, or just trying to cut down their tasks and make the program more efficient is definitely a great way to get them signed on board. Well, great. Thank you both so much for your answers to those questions. Jessica?
Great. I think the next portion, Brenna and Sean are going to share a couple of lesson plans that they've developed regarding the water and energy connection and integrating the topic into the curriculum. Go ahead, Brenna.
Okay. Our curriculum team wrote 4 lesson plans for middle school and high school for EE Week 2010. They're interdisciplinary lessons. They all meet national standards, and they cover different aspects of the water and energy connection. I'm going to briefly talk about the first of these, which is an introduction to the connection between water use and energy use. And the first few activities in this lesson educate students on how water is used to produce energy and how energy is used to produce water. And then going down to activity 3, and this lesson plan is geared for high school science, math, and social studies. Activity 3 will involve your students doing a water audit. They can either do this audit at home or as homework, or you could do it together in class. You could also do it at your school using your school's water information to calculate your school's water use. But one way to do this water audit involves determining, a water audit involves determining how much water is used and then using that information to identify steps that can be taken to save water. This can help families save money on water and utility bills and will also make your students more conscious of how their family uses water and how water can be saved. And there's a couple different ways to do this, which is why we thought it would be good to sort of walk through this section of the lesson plan. We have a couple of reproducibles at the end that have the different options of water audits. So I'm going to take us to the first part, which has information on conducting a household water audit. And again, there's a couple different ways to do this. First of all, you're going to want to make sure students understand the difference between personal daily domestic water usage, which is the water that they use every day themselves in their home, turning on the tap, flushing toilets, taking showers, versus the general water used to run their household, their school, their car, and other shared spaces. And then that also doesn't even include the water used to provide students with electricity they use and the production of anything, pretty much anything they consume that day. So there's a couple different levels of water audits. The first, you can collect water usage from your utilities bill, and this will accurately tell you the amount of water that you use, but not necessarily how it is being used. But it's a good example. You can bring in a sample water bill from your own home to show students. You can have them bring in water bills from their own homes, or they can do it at home with their family. Make sure the bills contain information regarding the amount of water consumed and average daily consumption during the billing period, or students can calculate the daily average by the consumption by dividing the total amount of water used by the number of days in the billing period. A lot of water bills use different units of measurement, so we have some conversions provided, and we also have links to online conversion tools. You can also calculate water usage from a water meter. And water meters are usually located on the property line or on the side of the house, and they also tell you accurately the amount of water used, but not necessarily how the water is used. So you can figure out the daily water usage over the course of 24 hours by reading the meter at the same time on 2 consecutive days and calculating the increase, or you can measure water use for several days and then calculate a daily water average. You can also, in order to find out how your water is being used, you can estimate water usage directly from the faucet. This is slightly less accurate, but it will indicate how each point of use is using the water. So you can be sure to test the indoor and outdoor faucets and shower heads by turning on the faucet to its normal flow and holding a container underneath and then measuring the quantity of water. If you let the water run for 10 seconds and then multiply by 6 to calculate gallons per minute. You can also test the amount of water used by your toilet by turning off the water supply to the toilet, mark the water line on the inside of the tank, and then flush to empty the tank. And then, then you're going to fill the tank with water from the tap or bucket. You could even use the same water you used to collect from the faucet. And then measure the volume of water that's required to fill the water back up to the mark that you made on the tank and record that number. You can also measure the amount of water used by all your appliances, such as washing machines and dishwashers. Flow rates are usually on the manufacturer's specifications. Otherwise, we provided some averages. And then finally, you're going to want to measure how many times per day and how many minutes each day each fixture or appliance is used. You multiply the flow rate to calculate the daily or weekly average. We also have a personal water audit. I'll take you to that page. This one's a little more simple, and it introduces students to this idea of their personal water usage and thinking about how and when they use water throughout the day. It's definitely more simple, but it's a great introduction, and they can do it pretty easily at home. We also have some links in this lesson plan to some online calculators. These tend to be more accurate and comprehensive, but they're not as personalized, and they don't have the students calculating their own, walking through the house and thinking about their own daily use. But there's a great water footprint calculator we provide, as well as Earth Day Network's ecological footprint quiz, which factors not only water use but also energy use and other lifestyle factors and how they all work together. And then we also have a couple of great examples of water audits from some federal and state agencies. And basically all these different audits will conclude slightly different results depending on their level of accuracy and the different water uses that are measured, and also accounting for personal differences. And it's also important to remind your students to realize that water usage varies with the season, so they should consider summer versus winter, and then also variations by the day or the week. So they should definitely factor in and think about different water uses throughout different days and times of the year. Another activity, a way to extend this activity, is to have students do more than one type of audit and compare the results and try to make hypotheses for any differences that show up. And most of these audits focus on water use only, so be sure to remind your students that by saving water, they're also saving energy and reducing the carbon emissions that go into the atmosphere. And the wrap-up activity in this lesson plan includes calculating the students' water usage averages and discussing their water usage. They can compare with each other and also with the average American. And it's a great way to discuss students' usage, get them thinking about how they use water, as well as moving into discussing methods of conservation and behavioral changes they can make to conserve water and therefore conserve energy. And then Sean is going to speak about our fourth lesson plan, which talks about the water use in different energy sources. Go ahead, Sean.
Just letting it load up, sorry. There we go. So this is the fourth lesson in our packet of materials that we've made for EE Week. And I want to give a thanks to both David Wood and Margaret Pennock, who are writers, curricular writers with us, but also some of the best teachers that we know of in the country. And they teach at Sidwell Friends School here in the district, where the Obama girls go to school. So, we've really tried hard to provide quality-based resources to you for EE Week, and I wanted to give a thanks to them with their help. This last lesson plan tries to really bring out and manifest the hidden relationships as was discussed throughout this webinar. And that hidden relationship is whether it's involved in extraction, production, processing, transportation, or consumption. Energy and water are directly related, and it's something that I hope everyone's been able to, infer by now throughout this presentation. So with this lesson, we want to delve more into how do you teach that to your students. And again, this is a more of a high school-based lesson. And it's more focused on either a science or social studies-based class, but there are math opportunities that I'll get into and show you in a few minutes. But specifically, the lesson uses photographs in order to impart the educational, knowledge necessary to understand the hidden relationships between water and energy. So with that, you would start the lesson with our warm-up that I'm going to take you to right now. And it's a way to gauge your students on where they're at, and also help you then guide the lesson, because we have several activities and opportunity routes that you can take with various reproducibles in this lesson. And so with the warm-up, we want to ask 3 simple questions, and that is, true or false questions. It's number 1. Nuclear power plants use a substantial amount of water in the process of making electricity. So you'd ask your students true or false. Then you'd ask the same thing for coal power plants, and also solar power plants. Now, what you want to get is that assessment on if they say true to all of them, false for all of them, or is it a mixed bag? Because what's interesting, and as Devin pointed out earlier, it's actually true for all of them. And water is used in the process through all of it, and even some forms of solar now are more than coal. And not many people know that, and so you can really raise the educational value here by gauging your students first and then taking them through the lesson. And I'm going to show you how to do it one way with the photographic activity here. So the photographic activity, I can get us there. Sorry. It takes a second to load. There we go. Apologies. Is this answer sheet on page 24. And what it does is you would print this out before and have it ready to go, as well as the pictures that you're going to see in a minute. And it has basically almost every form of energy that we wanted to kind of, portray, whether it's natural gas or, oil rigs out at sea, and evaluate, both A, that these pictures are denoting that these are forms of energy and how we acquire energy, but also B, that water is involved in the process. So you've got two moments of education going on. So with that, you have these printed out and you hand them out, as well as you want to have the pictures that we've provided ready to go. And pages 15 through 23 offer these pictures, and I'm going to just quickly show you a few of the pages, but they're here, they're sourced, so that you can find out more about them if you want. And there are different ways that more or less humans get energy or involved in the energy extraction process. And I'll show you a couple more. Again, as we discussed earlier with Devin, you can see a concentrated solar power plant here in photo J and how that can work. So trying to show that and impart this to the students. So lastly, we have the answer sheet already made for you to simplify this process because we understand that you have limited time. We also are interested in these subjects and want to teach the students about these kind of important matters. That's on page 25 of the lesson. And with this, you go over it with the students after they've done the photographic activity hunt. And you'll be able to then see where the students are in terms of not only understanding what types of energy the photos are related to, but then B, start that discussion on water usage and water intensity to be specific. So that would be the first activity. So after you've done the photos, they've correlated them, and you've had the discussion, you would then move into the mathematics part, which is on page 26, where we want you now to graph. You want the students to graph the actual water intensity of these different power sources. And we've given the basic power sources here for you to utilize and the water intensity with them. And of course, encourage students to be creative here with their graphs. But again, we provided a graph for you so that you know what the answer is supposed to look like, and you can also share with your students later. And that's on page 29. There we go. And as discussed by Devin earlier in many variables, you can see that water is used throughout the generation and usage of electricity. And we want students, again, to understand that process. We have questions here throughout this lesson and this activity that guide you through and have the answers there to help you simplify, again, and also impart the knowledge to the students. And with this, you can have the students either, put their own graphs up as a comparison and have all the students as a class look at all their graphs they, taped to the front of the classroom, or something where it could be one at a time where they're presenting their graphs, or you can just have it be a discussion-based, activity, or they turn them into you individually. It's up to you. And we have different variables for you guided throughout this lesson. But in conclusion, we hope that this is like a one activity and one whole set of issues that can help you better show your students and illustrate and perceive the relationship between water and energy better. And with that, I'd like to open it up to further questions here.
1 minute. We're having another technical difficulty. Give me a second, and I'll unmute Sarah. Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. We have a question from Gail about the water audits, and she was wondering if there was any feedback from teachers on how many students have participated in the water and energy audit curricula and what the results were.
I actually haven't gotten any feedback, but I don't know if the folks at NEAF have heard anything. We just posted these resources about a week and a half ago. But Jessica, do you know?
I haven't gotten any feedback about these particular resources. NEAF has developed a program that we call Be Waterwise that we've tested in 2 cities now. We're in the process of our second pilot city where we're working with schools on school water audits. The program started last year with Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and we're just getting some results in now from a year of water conservation efforts. But in general, the students were able to integrate, or the teachers were able to integrate the water audit activities in with the math, science, and social studies classes, and we got some really good feedback about the teachers and students getting a lot out of it, both as far as water conservation, but also as a hands-on way to teach the core content with an environmental activity. We're in the process of launching the program in Atlanta and Atlanta Public Schools this spring, and we're getting feedback as we go. So if you're interested in how it works and some case studies on how it's worked in K through 12 classrooms, you should look at eeweek.org/b_water_wise, and you can get some information about how that program in particular has worked in the schools that we're piloting it in. And I don't think there are actually any other questions about these activities. I'll give you guys a minute if you'd like to type one into the chat feature, but that was the only question we had on the activities.
I'll just take this moment to say we showed you two, and keep in mind there are also two other lesson plans. One is on the energy embedded in bottled water, and the other is on the learning how your water is treated and how it gets to you by investigating your local water treatment facility. And those are both for grades 5 through 8, but all of the lesson plans can be adapted for higher or lower grades by slightly altering the activities.
Great. Well, I'd like to say once again thanks to all of our presenters, Bevan, Brenna, and Sean. You guys did a wonderful job and presented a lot of really interesting information here tonight that I think will be useful for our participants. Like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, the entire audio and video of this broadcast will be archived at eeweek.org, probably by the end of this week, if not the beginning of next week. So if you missed anything and would like to review or share with a colleague, that'll be available online. We'll also be posting shortly a list of all of the links that were discussed in this webinar, so you'll have all of the links, and we'll post the PowerPoint slides as a separate file, so you'll have those in case you'd like to pull anything for use in your classroom. The presenters and facilitators are listed here with all of our contact information, and you're welcome to be in touch with any of us if any questions come up as you review your notes or start to think about and digest this material a little bit. And here are all of the program websites for the 3 programs that you learned about today. River Network, Saving Water, Saving Energy. Earth Day Network has a ton of educational resources on their educator network at earthday.net. And of course, eeweek.org is our homepage for National Environmental Education Week with more resources for educators, links, and other tools. We will be sending a survey. I think I mentioned earlier this is our first webinar, so we're still learning how to facilitate a webinar and what topics might be of interest to you all. So we'd love to hear your feedback, and that survey will be an opportunity for you to let us know how we did tonight and how we can improve for next time, as well as give us some ideas for what you'd like us to focus on in future webinars. And we'll also share information about those future webinars via eeweek.org and our e-newsletters. So that's all we have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for participating, and I know those of you on the East Coast, this is a pretty late evening for you, but I hope you found it worthwhile, and we'll look forward to hearing your feedback. Have a great night, everyone.